Hey everybody, happy Friday! So recently I've been getting some questions about my personal journey through life and in my career, and in particular how I went from being a sort of language learner, polyglot. I was teaching and doing various things all around languages in the past, to now working as a programmer and a software engineer here in San Francisco for the last several years. And it's Friday, it's been a long week, I'm sure for many of you as well, so I thought this was a really nice opportunity to just sit down and do a bit more of a personal video with you all. And with that, I also want to invite you to just come and spend 30 seconds with me, just like really taking a breath, taking in the moment, appreciating the weekend's almost here while we go and make a nice, humble Americano together. And then I'll leave a timestamp here for those of you who are not interested in that and want to just skip straight to the main topic. But for the rest of you, let's take a breath. Let's go enjoy making a cup of coffee. Okay, whew, there we go. Oh, I just love it. I really hope you enjoyed that. It's kind of nice to just, I don't know, this is my ritual and it's nice to bring you guys into it once in a while. I love it. Okay, so let's jump into the story. Now, first of all, I want to give you a quick bit of context on my personal background. Some of you will know this already, but I'm going to repeat it just in case anyone's new here. So, when I was a kid, I was actually really bad at languages. That was one of my worst subjects in school. I had a teacher who told me I would never learn to speak a second language, but I also struggled in general in school. And so growing up, I really had a lot of self-confidence issues, especially just believing in myself that I had the ability to learn things that seemed hard, right? And especially languages. And then, later in life, as I became an adult, I actually fell in love with language learning. And so once I had successfully learned a whole bunch of languages, and it became clear, no, I can really do this. I can learn things, right? No matter how complex, I really did start to believe in myself, at least internally. I'm still very bad, even today, at projecting confidence outwardly. But I believed in myself that I could learn even hard things, However, even at that point, this is a few years ago now, I remember distinctly saying, I could never learn to program, could never learn how to code. That just seemed like a step too far for me, and I didn't think I was smart enough. So now that we have that context, I want to share quickly a few principles that I have applied when learning languages that are going to become relevant as we talk about how that helped me become a programmer. So in language learning, one thing that I developed over the years is that whenever I was faced with some information, some knowledge, whatever it was, that was just really hard for me. I remember, for example, learning German noun cases, right? And when I first started learning German, it was just so baffling to me, right? was having a really difficult time like wrapping my head around how these different words were changing in different contexts. And so basically what I did is I decided to just like learn those basics of German grammar over and over again, right? So I did like a textbook, I think it was Asimil, went through a certain amount until it started to get a bit confusing. And then I went and looked at a different textbook, and then I looked at an app. And I've always done this, right? Because every time I go through and learn this information, I understand it better than I did the previous time. And so the philosophy I had was, well, you know, that's how I'm going to do it. If I'm really struggling to learn something that feels difficult, I'm going to try to attack it from as many different angles as possible. And so the best and easiest way for me to do that was, okay, I'm going to relearn the basics, the fundamentals, whatever it is, from as many different resources as possible, different materials, different apps, textbooks, and also at different times on my journey. So what I'll do is that I may move on to sort of intermediate stuff and maybe even slightly advanced things, but I'll frequently come back to the basics. And I find that every time I do that, it really starts to click. I remember being a really advanced French speaker and then going back and studying basic French grammar. And there were so many things that were like, oh, it's clicking. I get it. Like, this makes so much more sense now that I have so much more global context on the French language, now that I have so many experiences I can think back to and reference. So this has often been my approach to tackling really hard stuff with language learning. Now, the second thing that I've always done with languages that we've talked about a lot on this channel recently is that when it comes to not just taking in theoretical knowledge, but also then turning that into real world skills, right? So in the case of languages, building like a basic level of fluency, becoming sort of functional in a language. I typically don't wait, for life to present those opportunities. I am very independent in how I practice with myself, and it helps me to develop these really real world skills. I recently did an interview in German with the wonderful Carrie from Easy German, and that was really fun. And I may have made mistakes, but it showed that me practicing by myself and building that basic fluency alone, it does translate into real world conversational skills. And so these are two principles that I want you to keep in mind now as we talk about how I became a programmer. So I came into programming through design, actually. I had become extremely interested in graphic design, and I started doing that as part of my freelance work. Then I ended up actually doing a bunch of graphic design for some language conferences. So I designed brochures and flyers and even sort of paid ads and different things, all for a couple different language conferences. And I also became really interested in web design. And this is around the time that I also started working on my book. Because basically what happened is I said to myself, like, there are these huge projects that seem just so much bigger than me, so much bigger than anything I could do, right? These are things that professionals do, right? Like writing a book or designing a book or building a website. But I started to get really interested in this idea. Why? Like, why can't I write a book? I like writing. I like writing blog posts. I like writing essays. I've always enjoyed doing research. And like, why couldn't I just write something on a larger scale that happens to be a book? And I like designing things. I like graphic design. I like print. I love layout. And I love typography, all these things. Why can't I design my own book? And if I just put the hours in and use the resources online, maybe I can build a project that really does feel like something so much bigger than what you might expect from just a regular person like me. And so I started writing my first book and designing it as well and learning the skills along the way. And that also led to this idea of, what if I could design my own website? And then I could sell my book on that website. And then that led to this crazy idea at the time, which was, I wonder if I could even just learn like enough basic like HTML, and then I later learned about CSS and what that was, which is for like basically building a website and styling it, making it look nice. I wondered, like, I'm not going to be able to code. I'm going to be terrible at it. It's too hard for me, But what if I could learn just enough? And if I could do like a WordPress website and then, customize it and then make it really feel like mine, those felt like two really big projects that I could do. And so I started working on that. And so naturally, when I started learning things like HTML and CSS and general programming things, the approach that I took was, okay, there were these online courses available. I had found a really good website called Team Treehouse. I found another good website called Codecademy. Those are two of my absolute favorites. I really, really like them. They're wonderful. And I'm actually going to have some links in the description. There's not a sponsored video. Those are affiliate links, but it's just because I really, really like those companies. I like the work they've done and the courses they produce. So if you want to go check them out, if you're interested in learning about programming or design, then I recommend it. So what I did is that I did the same thing as I talked about with German noun cases, right? I found it a little bit difficult and kind of complicated. So I took a basic course on like HTML, CSS, and then I took another course, and then I did a YouTube tutorial, then I read a blog post, and before you knew it, I was getting really comfortable with these technologies. And so then I started thinking like, hang on, what if I could actually learn real programming? I thought, like, what if I could learn JavaScript? Because I had learned about what that is at this point. And essentially, I just kept wanting to go deeper and deeper. So every time I got comfortable at one layer of abstraction, I wanted to learn one level deeper. How does it work underneath the hood? And so I started learning JavaScript, which is when it really began to feel like I was becoming a programmer, but I never thought of myself as a programmer. And again, I found this really difficult. So Team Treehouse had this excellent, really long tutorial about learning JavaScript. So I started doing that. And then at a certain point, I felt lost. I felt like I wasn't grasping it. And it felt just like German noun cases or Japanese grammar and word order or many other things in language learning. So I did what I always do. I stopped, went back to the beginning with a different course. So I was on like Codecademy, doing their JavaScript courses, learning that. It really helped to review those same fundamentals. And at a certain point, I got kind of stuck. And so I went back to the Treehouse course and I did that again. And then I did a YouTube thing. I found some courses on Udemy. And before long, I had done like 4 or 5 different JavaScript courses, kind of going back and forth between them. And I ended up feeling actually quite comfortable with the, basics of JavaScript. And so I started going deeper and I thought, well, now I want to know what we call back-end development, because I was getting pretty comfortable with front-end development, which is like most things that you see visually as a user of a website. But again, there was a level of abstraction, right? I wanted to know, well, what happens behind the hood? So I started learning more and more. And long story short, at a certain point, I began building more and more complex stuff. I started building like a flashcard application. And this is where we start to think about the second philosophy I told you about with language learning. When it comes to building real world, practical skills to apply my theoretical knowledge quite independently. And I had also, began building these big projects like my book and then the website to sell my book. And that's when I had the idea, hang on, what if I could build really, really useful tools for language learners? What if I could build apps and software and oh my God, what if I could really build helpful stuff for this community of people? And what if I could contribute with this new skill that I have? And that's when I had the idea for Journaly. And so, at that point, I started studying more and more complex things in programming. I started learning different frameworks, all kinds of different stuff in the field of programming. But I always applied that same sort of set of principles, right? I did at least 3 or 4 different courses for every single technology I ever learned. Many of those courses I did several times. And all the while, I was constantly applying everything I learned to these real world projects. And so basically, at a certain point, I finally finished my book. I published it. I finished my first ever website and I started selling my book on that website, which is still the website that I sell my book on today, although I'm going to be soon finally releasing a brand new personal website, which is completely different, and I'm really excited about it. And as many of you will know, I began pursuing building a pretty huge platform for journaling in foreign languages, which is now actually finally coming to life and is, it's really, really exciting. And so that's basically how I learned programming. And then the thing is that because I was building these really exciting real world projects that were really quite large, especially for someone with my level of experience, which was 0, I was able to actually be quite effective when doing my very first interviews. The thing is, I never planned on working as a software engineer. I never thought I'd be good enough, and it just wasn't something I'd thought about. All I wanted to do was build useful stuff for people in the language learning community. But at a certain point, I became homeless again. I couldn't pay my rent anymore. I had nothing left after I published my book. I made a whole video at the time about losing my home, and it was supposed to be a really positive, optimistic video as I faced this great uncertainty in front of me. But some of the feedback I got from my YouTube audience at the time, which was of course much smaller back then, people were just saying what are you doing? You're designing software, you're building pretty complex stuff, and you should not be starving. You should not be homeless. You should not be struggling to pay rent or put food on the table. You should go and try and work as a software engineer. And that was the first time I ever considered it. I'd never imagined doing this as a job before that. So yeah, I decided to give it a try. I honestly did not think anybody would take me seriously. But, I got my first set of interviews at some companies in San Francisco. And I just talked with such passion about the projects I had worked on. And I was able to talk people through everything I had done. And I got through the interviews. I actually passed the interview process at my very first company that I interviewed at. At the time, I had no shoes that were not held together with duct tape, and I actually remember some of my YouTube audience back then sent me money on PayPal so I could buy new shoes, get a haircut, get some decent clothes, so I would look presentable when I came for my first on-site interview here in San Francisco. And that was it. And one last thing I'll say is that even once I came here and started working as a software engineer, I never stopped that exact same process. And so even while I got my first 1 year of professional experience as a software engineer, I was still programming all day outside of work, right? So after work, I was building Journaly, which often meant doing a bunch of online courses, trying to learn the basics of database design, or going deeper into just fundamental computer science and learning about data structures and algorithms, and then going a bit higher again. Just so many aspects of learning to build a giant application like Journaly. That's what I was doing outside of work. And so even though I now have about 3 years professional experience programming, what I found is that I got double that really, because I was programming more outside of work and I was learning more skills outside work than I was inside of work. And so when I got my second job here in San Francisco, I had so much more to show them than just that first 1 year experience, because I'd been building these really big projects outside of work. And I found that, people were surprisingly accepting of that as being real world practical experience. And so over the course of these 3 years, I think that, being a language learner, being a polyglot, and coming in with those sort of philosophies and principles that I always used to learn languages, it's really helped me to be a more effective programmer, and certainly to learn all the skills I have now a lot more effectively. It's been really wonderful, and it's changed my life. So I would just say, for anyone watching, I think I paid about $300 in total to learn all the skills that I needed to come and get my first job as a developer. You know, had a few monthly subscriptions I did here and there, bunch of free videos on YouTube, some $10 tutorials on Udemy. Like I said, I mainly really enjoyed Team Treehouse and Codecademy. It's amazing that for just like $200 or $300, which I know for some people is still a lot of money. For me, it was a lot. But compared to how much money some people spend getting those skills through traditional education, it's quite remarkable. So I would say anyone who wants to go into programming or graphic design or any other design field like product design or UX, UI design, I would say go for it. And I really hope that this story can help give some of you a bit of extra inspiration or motivation to follow your own path. And with that, I wish you a wonderful Friday. Thank you for listening. And like I said, I do hope this story was helpful for some of you. And I'll see you back here on Monday for another awesome video.